Okay, so I just recorded another version of this video a minute ago, but looking back, it was a little bit drawn out and I missed some vital points. So this is take two. Before I start on today's topic, which is the real dangers of smoking weed, just a disclaimer. The reason I'm smoking a cigarette is because I'm quite stressed right now. I've got a lot of weight on my shoulders and it's not really wise for me to have weed in my possession at the moment. Plus the fact that I don't actually need to smoke weed regularly at this stage anyway. I'm past that, although for many years it was a vital part of my daily routine. So, let's get into this. Think to when most people smoke weed for the first few times. Most often what it will be is you're with a group of friends and you're a younger or older teenager, give or take a few years for some people. And for half of the people it goes to a more positive experience, which is where, you're laughing and music sounds great, you feel really relaxed. For the others, it can be more like you get paranoid, you're anxious and you feel sick. And for a lot of people it's somewhere in between. Also, the first few times you smoke it, it can be very strong. So whereas regular smokers just smoke it and go about their day, like you might feel like you're being pulled down into the sofa and being sucked into it or something like that. So there we are. Now, for the majority of people, and I'm speaking like on the places I know, like the UK, America, how I know we're educated from a young age and up until then, that point when you're smoking it and throughout that period of time, usually the most education you're going to be given about cannabis is from official sources. So from government funded drugs agencies, whether that's through leaflets, information they come into your school, and from the news, like you might hear news stories about the effects that cannabis has had on someone. Usually it's sensationalized because it's the news. Now, also your parents and your relatives, but they would have been given the same information generally. So that's where you're at. And at that point, weed is just weed. It's just something that a lot of people smoke, and some people seem to function quite well, and some people seem to, have very negative effects from it. But the truth about the true dangers of weed are so much deeper than that, and that's what we're going to get into. So I kind of just have to cut straight through to the truth. I can't really hang on to any particular subject area of the discussion. You will have to look into that yourself because there's no time. The video could go on for hours. Very basically, so we've got what we're taught about cannabis. Now, usually it's biased. It's biased in the sense that it wants to portray cannabis in a negative sense. The official channels will admit that it can make you relaxed, that it can make you happy, but generally they'll try to say that that reverses, that you will become paranoid, you could develop a mental illness, that it can be physically harmful. They might try to tell you that it causes cancer. And it won't cause cancer. And actually, just reversing back to the tobacco issue, the tobacco plant grown naturally, organically, and just drying out the leaves is not really a danger. It's a danger because the tobacco companies take over and they grow it in radioactive soil, they add things to it to make it burn slow and even, and so essentially make you more addicted, and that's what causes cancer. But anyway, back to the real issue at hand. So you've got the education, and they'll tell you it will make you vomit. They'll try to portray it in some ways as, projectile vomiting and things like this. No, it's not that. But also they won't really generally tell you that it can actually suppress real sickness, such as for people who are having chemotherapy. So it's biased and misleading. Then you start to use cannabis a bit more. And then you really start to think to yourself, well, these things that they've said are going to happen aren't happening yet, but you might expect them to still happen. So this is where we're at. You get into the media as well, and you're likely to see like some kind of news story about, how smoking a spliff is more dangerous than 20 cigarettes, or how someone was smoking weed and then got in a car crash. But what they don't tell you is this person was also drinking alcohol. But the headline is about cannabis because, got to demonize cannabis. And so you're doing this, and then you, for a lot of people, they get no further than this. Like, that's just it. Like, they use cannabis sometimes and it's just, it is what it is. But for some people, and you have to have a combination of attributes really to get to the end, or at least the deepest parts of where I'm going, you have to be a cannabis user. Well, you don't have to, but generally that's the people who start to question this. But alongside that, you need intelligence, you need compassion, and you need to do other research. You need to read, you need to look at the way the world works. So then you also can start to find out about the inspirational uses and the spiritual uses of cannabis. That's the musicians, the great musicians who have used cannabis: Pink Floyd, the Beatles, Bob Marley. Now, what really bugs me is that in our culture, generally, you know, people might be having drinks with their friends and, like, at a party, put on some Bob Marley and be like, he's so cool, he's a chill dude, and laughing and, you know, joking about weed. But then they miss the actual point of his message. And one of his most underrated songs, in my opinion, is called Babylon System. And it goes a little like this: Babylon System is the vampire, sucking the blood of the sufferers, building church and universities, deceiving the people continually. So if you're using cannabis, and if you're aware that it's not that bad, you start to question, well, why is it even illegal in the first place? Especially compared to alcohol and cigarettes, which are far more dangerous to your physical and mental health. Basically, it's unjust. And if you look into the medical uses, you start to see, well, how can it be so dangerous if it has so much positive medical uses? Now, a good person to look into for the medical information is Dr. Grinspoon from Harvard University, but there's a lot of information out there. So cannabis, in terms of helping physical illnesses, like if you have a migraine, it can ease your migraines. If you have epilepsy, it can reduce your seizures. And that might not just be smoking, that might be taking the cannabis oil. If you're even just a little aware, you would have seen the videos on Facebook or on the internet, documentaries of, you know, 5-year-old children in America being given cannabis oil, and it's reduced their seizures, you know, almost by like 99%, and then it can prevent them having brain damage and they can live a normal life. So if you go back to those things like that, the fact that we're not allowed to use cannabis, you know, we call it for recreation, I mean, that's unjust, it's unfair, because as a free and independent human being, you should be able to. But when you're stopping the medical uses, it's actually evil, because you're condemning some people to chronic pain. And I mean, it's a lot more than that. It's glaucoma, it can prevent people from going blind, it's asthma. The actual smoking of cannabis can widen your airways, help you breathe a lot easier if you have asthma. And it won't cause asthma. That's another thing we're miseducated about. We're told it will cause asthma. No, it won't. So you start to see that things don't quite add up. And this is the real danger of smoking weed. So where we're at is the education misleads us. The media sensationalizes things and misleads us. The laws are unjust, and what they do is they give money, profit, to organizations. They don't benefit people, they benefit organizations such as the police, who get more funding by, you know, boasting their reputation in the community by saying we've stopped like a criminal gang growing cannabis. But at the same time, because of their influence, it's only the criminal gangs who have the funds and the courageous enough to grow cannabis, and the general public are too scared because they don't want to lose their job, they don't want to lose their house. So what they're actually doing is stopping people from being able to grow it and take away the money from the criminal enterprises. So that's just another lie. And then some people, you can touch on hemp. Hemp is cannabis, but it's not weed, it's not psychoactive, it's a non-psychoactive cannabis plant, and it grows very tall, and it grows in soil just much like cotton, and you can make clothes from it. But when you use hemp, it can be grown organically, so you're not using pesticides, and it's not draining the soil, it's actually replenishing the soil, and it's good for the earth, good for the animals, good for the bees. And that all connects to the food, because also you can eat the hemp seed, which is a very nutritious food, which has all of the amino acids that we need for our body. So it starts to get very deep, because it's not making sense now. Why is this thing not allowed? With me? And then you move on to as I said, the inspiration and spiritual uses. So not just the music, but if you look at the history, if you look at like the tribes, the shamans who would use these psychoactive plants, not just cannabis, but we'll go into more of those in another video, but cannabis, it essentially helps them connect to a higher power, which is their own power. Now, another thing is, one of the jokes people crack when they're kind of into weed is that if people would just smoke weed instead of drinking alcohol, you know, you're much less likely to get into a fight. But the truth is, what weed does is it helps bring us together as a community. It can help an individual reconnect with the earth, see that they're one with the animals, the plants and the trees, and see that everyone on earth is their brother and sister. So when you realize this, you wouldn't want someone to be sick and suffering and not have access to cannabis and only have access to pharmaceutical drugs, which in many cases are actually detrimental to someone's health. Not all cases, but in many, detrimental to someone's health, where using cannabis, whether it's the oils, whether it is smoking it, can be a lot more beneficial and can actually, you know, help them live a happy life where they're free from pain and suffering. So it's evil to stop them. And then you have to just round all of these things up. Start from the beginning. Our education lies about cannabis. The media manipulates us into being against cannabis. People profit, organizations, profit from cannabis being prohibited. Hemp is good for the earth and good for our bodies. And spiritually, weed can help us feel at one with everything. Now, don't get me wrong, weed can definitely be misused. However, and I'm not going to go into this too much, although it's definitely worth looking into. For instance, it's not just for the physical illnesses that weed can help. It can also help people stop being depressed. It can uplift them. Whether you have an illness and it helps you feel better about getting through that, or whether you're just generally dissatisfied in life, weed can help you. Instead of just sitting there, you can channel your energy positively. A lot of people don't do that, but largely that's because of the miseducation. So some people do just, you know, sit and smoke cannabis and watch TV, and they use high amounts of it and it clouds their thinking. That's not what this is about. This is about using it wisely, but we don't have anyone who can teach you to do that, because education is supposed to be giving people like an informed choice, but it's not doing that because it's very biased. And essentially what it comes down to is you probably shouldn't smoke weed because it's illegal and because it will hurt you, which is false. The truth of the matter is that weed is a tool. Weed is a tool for realizing what we are and where we are going. Now, you have to dive into the kind of universe, because, you know, some people, they smoke weed and they realize, oh, I'm thinking about the universe. I'm thinking about the fact that I'm just on this big planet and floating through space with these stars and all of that. Look, my hand is not solid. This is not solid. Nothing is solid. Okay, we're a lot more powerful than we think because we are everything. But not the governments, the things above the government are suppressing our power. And this is where it all goes back to the money. Follow the money. Because the biggest drug dealers of hard drugs on the earth are connected to the government. It's like the CIA and people like this, and, you know, they're protecting the opium fields to develop heroin, and they choose whether to flood a community with a drug or not. And at the moment, weed is probably working more in their favor because people don't realize its power. So if you're just the average teenager and you're smoking weed, well, a lot of the time the people, the professionals, will tell you that your problems are because you're smoking weed, but they're neglecting a lot of other things. The fact that you're living in poverty, the fact that your parents are arguing at home, the fact that you can't accept your sexuality, the fact that you've been in a car accident, the fact that you've had a death in your family and you can't cope with it. So you're using weed to try to cope with the stress, but because you're not given any guidance on how to use weed, it's not really helping that much. But people blame it on weed, and so that ultimately is just the most destructive thing they could possibly do. So this is the real danger of weed, is that you wake up. Your consciousness shifts, okay? It goes even deeper. Because if we've been lied to about weed in education, what else are we lied to? Maybe we're just going through the education system to become slaves to the system, where we all work for profit, people's profit at the top, and then we actually are stepping on people below us to get to the top. Maybe if the media has lied about cannabis, it's lying about a lot of other things. What's really going on in the world? What are really the causes of wars? What are really the ways that certain people we demonize actually act and interact with other people? Thirdly, are these laws there for us or to keep us trapped? Fourthly, hemp. It's good for the earth. Why can't we use it? It's illegal in many places, even though it's not the psychoactive drug. And the hemp seed, healthy eating right to boost your health so you don't get ill in the first place, using natural cures. And I'm not one of these types about, oh, just use like a plant given to you by some random Chinese acupuncturist. I'm saying that generally, like, there are a lot of natural cures, especially for depression and things like this caused by past traumas, that are suppressed, and they're often from plants, and these plants are just not given to us. We're given chemicals and we're given all of these pills which are not actually helping in the long run. They're just, we're told they're help. And then it's like, well, these authorities are saying it, the teachers are saying it, the doctors are saying it. What if they don't know more about reality than us? What if we actually have the potential to know more about being a human than they do? And this is why you start to wake up. And that's when it boils down to the fact that they can say cannabis will make you crazy. Generally, it won't. You know, if you have a family history of mental illness, if you have an underlying mental illness, maybe in some people it can push the symptoms out more, it can make them a bit worse. But generally, the majority of people, if you're just like the average person, it's not gonna send you crazy. It's not gonna make you sick. It's not gonna do that. It's all a big lie. Everything we know is a lie. And that's what the real danger of smoking weed is that if you're clued up enough and if you use weed properly, then you'll start to realize this. And this is where it comes back to the whole paranoia thing, because the real paranoia is once you realize that nothing's as it seems and you smoke some weed, I mean, you're highly likely to get paranoid. It's going to make you paranoid because, I mean, for instance, you can be criminalized for having weed. You can be caged for growing a plant. There are people suffering, being ill, and they can be criminalized for trying to treat their illness. You realize that the world is a very scary, evil place, not because of the people around you, apart from the fact that they're acting often on behalf of being normal. They try to push you into social norms. Be normal. Don't abuse drugs, but, just drink alcohol on occasion. Never mind weed, never mind anything like that, because it's illegal. And, as long as you're fitting in with the norm, then it's cool. Like, they'll leave you alone. You can go to a job. You can satisfy yourself that you're happy with your life. You can go to jobs, celebrate Christmas, all of this, but then you don't actually really look at what's going on in the world. And the truth is, like, look at the money, the banking system. So you have very, very basically, the banks loan governments money, but they're creating this money out of thin air. There has to be interest paid back. And so essentially, because the interest has never existed, there is no way to pay it back. The world is in debt to banks, and they're in hand with the corporations and all of this. The corporations which create tobacco, which flood the world with fossil fuels and all of this, and deny any alternative fuels, and the pharmaceutical companies, all of these rich, powerful organizations are the ones in control. And that's the real danger of weed. And they'll try to tell you, oh, weed will make you schizophrenic. I mean, look, I sound schizophrenic now. I sound crazy to anyone who thinks that this society is insane. But the truth is, weed will wake you up to the truth if you use it well. And in some cases, bear in mind, you have to misuse it for a very long time before you start to notice this. That's why, the majority of people aren't on this wavelength, but eventually it can help you get to that. So I don't really look down on people who misuse weed, because it's a process. And it's not just about smoking weed, there's a lot more to it. But to round everything up, like, weed will show you that we're all one. Weed will show you that your community matters. Weed will show you that you can take your power back into your own hands, and that we're a lot more than we've been told. We're not just little separate individuals who have to trot along on the trail and be like sheep and led and believe everything the media says. It's that we can seek knowledge within ourselves. We can find out the truth of the matter. We can be very powerful. We can heal ourselves by healing the earth and taking care of the animals and respecting them and all of that. And that's the message. That's the real danger of weed. But it comes with a warning. Beware. Because if you get into this too deeply, you'll realize that the world doesn't have to be, but right now the way it functions, it's an evil place. And you will be an outcast, and you could potentially land yourself in a lot of trouble. And that's the real dangers of smoking weed. Be